Hello and welcome to Fae The Source from young Scot. I'm Duncan, and in this series we talk to experts about important topics, taking a closer look at the issues that really matter. The first topic we're going to explore is what it means to be a young man in Scotland today. We'll be talking openly about masculinity, the good, the bad and everything in between. This is a safe space for honest conversation, and today we're joined by Iain Corbett. Would you mind telling us just a little bit about who you are and what exactly you do?
I am Iain Corbett. I work predominantly for the Children and Young People's Centre for Justice, or CYCJ, because I'll not keep saying that title because it's so long. And I work as a participation, policy and engagement advisor, which is, again, very wordy title.
I was going to say.
Essentially, my job is just to make sure that young people that are in the justice system are involved in the decisions that might affect them.
Okay.
So if there are going to be changes to decision making, to policy, to legislation around the justice system that might affect the young people that are in the justice system, it's my job essentially to work with them to say, what do you think about this?
Okay.
What are your suggestions? How do you think this might impact you? Is there anything that the policy makers, decision makers haven't thought about? And how do we make sure that you're involved in solutions? I also do other pieces of work within that where it's about education and development for young people in the justice system, specifically in Pullman Young Offenders Institute. So I'm working with young people who are deprived of their liberty. And I also do a bit of work with Fearless Scotland, who are the youth crime stoppers, and do sort of development work with them in sort of secure settings and in communities and stuff, but all kind of interlinked, sometimes too closely linked.
I was going to say, they do definitely seem like there's a thread through all of those, even if you're doing multiple things. Is it quite a rewarding, do you feel as if it's quite a rewarding process you're involved with? Or
it has the potential to be hugely rewarding. But it can also be hugely frustrating. Do you know what I mean? Like, because you particularly when you hear things from young people which are in a lot of ways common sense, and then you're trying to feed them in and trying to make change and action happen based on that, and the systems that you're trying to influence just don't bend in that kind of way. So that can be frustrating. But I've also worked with people who I've watched change their life, considerably change their life.
Amazing.
People I've worked with and been deprived of their liberty, who are now going on to do phenomenal things, and to be a small part of that journey with them is really rewarding. And I think so it's got highs and lows, but it's like a roller coaster. It's real highs and real lows, and everything in between.
I think that's a really good way of putting it, is highs and lows, because I'm sure every day will be very different when you go in, but the highs are very, very good and the lows can be frustrating. But obviously you've said that you work as a participation advisor, but what actually led to you working with young people in this way?
Well, I suppose it was kind of accidental. I was a young person in the justice system, which I suppose is the kind of first piece in the puzzle. I never at any point when I was in the justice system thought that I would end up working in the system. In fact, I didn't like that system very much whatsoever. I got myself into a bit of bother when I was about 18, 19, and basically was told by a lawyer, get yourself into something positive or you're going to find yourself somewhere rather negative. And that's what I kind of tried to do. I didn't have qualifications, I didn't have anything that would really give me a pathway, and I had done a bit of youth theatre work, which was just kind of like my parents' attempt to get me to stop being involved in gangs and antisocial behaviour. I never liked football. I was always a basketball fan, but there wasn't much provision for basketball then. And when I went to youth theatre, I found there was a sort of cathartic thing of being able to process my emotions that I had never had before. So it kind of helped me regulate a little bit. So when I was sort of forced to go and do something, I went to college initially and done acting and performance, then went to uni and done that, and then started doing some work in like community theatre. And it was at that point when I started working with communities, I thought, I want to work with communities that were more like mine and work with young people that were more like me.
Absolutely.
And didn't really know how to get there. So I modelled around in youth work spaces and theatre spaces and various stuff. Also worked for a housing association, unrelated, for a number of years. Before kind of finding my way into helping set up an organisation that was specifically working with young people that were justice experienced. And then for the last few years I've worked in universities, which is where CYCJ is based. Looking at sort of research and policy around violence and youth justice, and I've been doing this now for 6-7 years.
Amazing. I feel as if just listening to the way that you're speaking about, then you've kind of had this like full circle moment where you've started you've had an experience in a bad place, and you were in a moment of kind of like struggling, not really knowing where do you want to go, but you had positive experiences with things that you mentioned so far, and that brought you to maybe go down that line and, like you said, want to give those experiences to other young people.
Yeah, absolutely. I probably would say that now, but that journey seems a lot more planned than what happened.
Fair.
I was given a lot of opportunities. There was a lot of people who probably gave me platforms that I didn't deserve, sometimes because they thought I had things to share, and sometimes because it benefited their organisation.
Yeah.
So it was never really... It's kind of hard one, because I could never like work with the young people I work with and give them a blueprint of like how I went from A to B, because there was a lot of chance involved, there was a lot of personalities involved, and some of it was hard work and some of it was merit based and stuff like that, but other parts of it were just people pushing me that way.
I was going to say it fell into place and it ended up happening that way. Now, obviously, the people that might be tuning in to this specifically will be young people that might be in various scenarios. We're looking a lot at masculinity. So I was going to ask you, what challenges the young people that have faced challenges like exclusion or offending, how do those experiences mould their kind of view on masculinity?
Well, I suppose it's important to recognise that people's life experiences, regardless if they're in the justice system or care system or whatever, shape your views. The people around you shape your views. The media that you consume shapes your views. When I work with people who are deprived of their liberty, then there is other exacerbating factors, definitely. Like the prison service is a hyper-masculine environment, and to navigate that and to survive in that, then you sometimes need to adopt hyper-masculine traits that you maybe wouldn't have otherwise, and those can sometimes stick. But there are also parts of the prison service that people don't really always recognise, that actually, for a lot of people, it's the first time they've felt safe, and you're able to have conversations around what it is to be a man in ways that you wouldn't be able to have in the community. A lot of the people I work with, if I approached them with some of the things that we talk about or some of the activities that we do in Pullman and tried to do that in a community setting with 19 and 20-year-old guys, I don't think they would land quite so well, to say the least. So prison is just like a condensed version of society, and there are a whole range of views and experiences, but just quite often heightened because of the sort of condensed nature of being there. So I suppose that all of our views are shaped by our experiences, is the point I'm trying to make, for better or for worse.
I was going to say, true. I totally agree with that, because everything we consume on a daily basis obviously moulds our opinions, whether it be family or whether it be something we see online. But I think it's more so trying to see if people that go through that process, are they coming out the other side with a very specific idea of what it feels like or what it should be like to be a man?
Potentially, well, I hope not, because I hope a lot of the work I'm doing in there is to try and counter that. So I think we have right now a real problem with our men. So if we look at misogyny, which has been a long-standing problem but is heightened currently, that is a man problem. That's not a woman problem. We are the perpetrators of that. We have a society designed by men for men, and we need to recognise that as guys and take stock of that. But I also think there's a whole host of other things at play as well. Like there are influences in media that are still consumed in a prison setting, maybe not on the internet, but you're still getting access to TV, you're still getting access to radio and things like that. And I think we can't underestimate how much society plays in that. We've got global leadership right now, men in power who are not the examples of masculinity that you would maybe want to be perpetuated. I was going to say on the highest platforms. Definitely, it's the role models, that the way that people get exposed to these type of experiences through prison or whatever system it might be. Even if you weren't in that, you're still being exposed to male role models, I guess, that aren't going to help you in that matter themselves. Again, if we take it back to people that are tuning in here that might be young people, what would you say to a young person that might feel pressured to man up or hide their feelings as a stereotype of being manly, and where can they turn to for support with this if they are feeling that way? I think one of the things, we've been conned almost into thinking that not dealing with or not accepting or not even feeling our emotions is what it is to be a man. And I think I would encourage you to think now the exact opposite. If you accept that your version of masculinity is to go against the grain and to stand up and to be strong, then actually being vulnerable and showing emotion and being compassionate in today's environment is one of the biggest shows of strength that you can have. And I think that if we want to radically change the conversation around masculinity, then we need to lean into the things that are appealing to people.
Absolutely.
And change the narrative on that. And I think to be strong and brave and bold right now, actually being vulnerable encompasses all of that. And I think we've got a really weird thing where I touched on misogyny there, but actually if you look at any of the harms that are caused in society, if you look at our global wars, if you look at violence against women, violence against children, violence against animals, violence against the self, suicide, it's almost always men that are the perpetrators. So fundamentally we have a problem with our men not being in touch with their emotions. And I think if we can promote that there's real strength in being in touch with your emotions and how you can use them as a vehicle to become stronger and to lift the other men round about you with you, then it changes that narrative. Nobody's asking you to give up on what your idea of being a man is.
Agreed.
It's to allow it to evolve to support and raise other people at the same time.
I like that. The use of the word evolve there I think is really good, because they're not being forced to get rid of all the stuff that they've spent their whole life learning and all the stuff that they've learnt before. It's not effectively being asked to just get rid of it. It's building on top of that. If somebody's in that position, you've spoken a lot on kind of a support on what maybe they should do and what they should focus on, but where can they turn to? Is there any solutions that in place or recommendations you might make?
Women, I think. Like, it seems a bit counterintuitive to say that the best advice on how to be a man would be to go to a woman, but a lot of the work I do in Pullman right now, I'll have conversations about who the most important figures are in the young men's life. Almost invariably, it's their mums or their grands. When you think about the most compassionate and nurturing teachers in school, it's almost always the women. But women are also living their lives scared of men, so they know how to be in this constant state of fear. They know how to live in a society that's oppressed them forever, and yet they still treat us with compassion and kindness. And if we're going to change how we are as men, then I think we could learn a lot from them by saying, okay, there are pressures in life, there are things that are going to beat you down, there are going to be things that are unfair, but if you can turn around and treat that with compassion, then we'll all be doing a little bit better. That's,
again, a really good way of putting it. And there's a lot of information there that shows that women are really doing an incredible job for men, like you've said, in those scenarios. You touched a little bit on family there as well, which is very important. So I was going to ask you, what roles do you think schools, family members, workers that they might be with play a role in challenging or reinforcing harmful gender norms that they might have?
I think from the day a child is born, how we treat our boys and how we treat our girls is different. Do you know what I mean? And we've got to realise that we don't grow up with different traits. They're a social construct. If you've got two toddlers and they both fall over, you pick the girl up, you make sure she's okay, and you nurture her. You turn to the boy and say, oh, come on, big boys, don't cry, dust it off. And straight away, we're creating this narrative that we support our women, but boys need to man up from this height. What I think we need to do is to start leaning into critical thinking. I don't think we can turn around and say, this is what it is to be a man, this is how you do it, this is the role model, because we all are interested in, attracted to, supported by different versions of men. What I think we need to be doing is to encourage people to be critical in their thinking and to be reflective. So one of the pieces of work I do when I'm in Pullman and the Young Offenders Institute is around Andrew Tate. Now, Andrew Tate famously exploits women, and that is abhorrent and it shouldn't happen. The biggest group of people that Andrew Tate exploits is young men. Do you know what I mean? And if you start to then look at saying, how does he monetize what he does? Who pays for this? Young men pay for it. How does he do it? Where does it via social media? The social media algorithms are putting this stuff in front of you. When you start being critical about the information that you get, the sources that's coming from, and how that even ends up in front of you, you can then start to think how our man narrative is being shaped, and you can start consuming other content. So when you start listening to other people and listening to counter arguments, Then if you still arrive at the point that he is the thing that appeals to you, then cool. But at least you've considered something else, and you've considered other viewpoints. And I would be very shocked if many people reach that conclusion at the end. So
for sure.
We'll see.
Effectively not being closed-minded to that being the only solution, and opening up and trying to explore other areas so that you've got something to choose from. Absolutely.
But I think that, just to add to that, I think that's where the youth workers and teachers and stuff, that critical analysis and that reflection isn't a natural thing.
No.
These are skills that can be taught.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And
Absolutely.
I think that's the point I really want to make is like, think about how we can teach the skills for people to do that rather than trying to teach them that this person is bad, because that often just makes it more appealing.
Well, yeah, again, I feel as if that's linked to not removing their ideas and not trying to get them to forget something that they've already learned. It's evolving, like you used, evolving on top of their opinion that they've already got, to try and basically build that more varied and maybe more accurate viewpoint. You mentioned before when you were speaking about young people, and we talked about solutions, and you said about getting them to become, trying to be vulnerable and trying to put themselves out there and maybe opening up. So you speak a lot about maybe young people's voices there. How do you think creating a space for their voices helps shift their mentality towards vulnerability, like you mentioned, and masculinity?
Yeah. So I think like, firstly, I'm not encouraging everyone just to go and be vulnerable for the sake of it. I'm just saying, if you feel like you need to be, then allow it to happen, I suppose. But I think what we are finding right now is so many men, young men and adult men actually, who feel disenfranchised, who feel they don't belong to anything. We're seeing it right now with the immigrant debate. We've got people pointing the finger because it's easier to blame a group of other than it is to actually take accountability for yourself. And I think when you don't feel like you belong to something, and you don't feel heard, you don't feel valued, then it's easier to start pointing and looking at other directions and sort of channeling your frustration. And I think some of the work that I've been doing is kind of been saying, well, what is the opposite of that? What actually, rather than having young men that feel disenfranchised, we actively say, how do we give these people a voice? Yeah. But when we give them a platform, it's not about just elevating their views as they are now. It's about doing that critical piece and that reflective piece and saying, right, we'll give you the platform, we'll give you the channels to speak to decision makers and government, whatever, but you have to have a well-considered argument. You have to have looked at both sides. You have to look at the implications of your thinking and your actions and the opposite side of that. Yeah. And then we'll give you the platform. And what that allows us to do is to create the space to go on that journey. Yeah. But also, when they do then have their voice elevated, it's been elevated through a process which allows them to come to conclusions which they actually believe, and it allows well-considered, well-thought-out arguments to be delivered to the people that are going to make change.
Absolutely.
And I think that, and you see, like I can see young men that I work with visibly stand taller through a period of weeks. Amazing. Do you know what I mean? I can see that they recognise that they're not powerless. Okay. Do you know what I mean? And I think when you see those changes, people start to consider what their next action is and what the consequences of that are going to be, rather than just firefighting and reacting to things. And when you start being more considered and you start thinking about where you're going, and the boys I work with in prison, there's so many people, and I know this because I had the same thing. You spend your whole life working away from something that you don't ever really give any time or thought to what you're working towards. And I suppose that's when you say, right, we'll give you the platform, we'll give you the channels, and I'm talking about straight into Scottish Government, straight into like real decision makers, so it's not like a tokenistic thing. I'll create those pathways for you, but you have to then take that opportunity and use it to its fullest. And you can see them grab onto that power and run with it, and it's beautiful to see.
I was going to say, it sounds like it's really amazing. And when you talk about the highs, so effectively you are saying that you've seen people come out of that position where they're in that difficult situation, and you've shown how important it is to obviously create their informed opinions and a well-educated voice, so that when they do speak, it's not just coming out with the initial things that they're thought about. There's a lot of consideration that goes into it. And then you've also said that when they do get that point, they're standing taller, you can see that they're thinking more about it, and there's a positive outcome to the process that you've created.
Absolutely. And I think the important thing is those skills are directly transferable to almost every piece of decision making you're ever going to make. Do you know what I mean? And I think like once you have that skill set, it allows you to be a better young man, a better human overall. Because when you start like being conscientious in your thinking and considering how your actions impact other people, that generally is a good thing.
Yeah.
Now that can still be manipulated. People can still do bad with it.
Of course.
All of that sort of stuff.
It's not
but most
fail-safe.
people are good folk.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And even people who have done what we would deem bad things are generally good people. And I think like when you can equip them with the skills, I always think there's a real class issue to it as well, because like when you go to a private school, quite often you have a debate club and you're taught how to argue, you're taught how to construct arguments, you're taught how to consider other people's views and challenge them. And I don't think we do enough of that. And we live in a time that's very polarised. And actually, if we created space for people to just think about other people's views and experiences and take them into consideration, we would all probably get on a little bit better.
I was going to say, there would be a lot more thought to the things that we do. Is there anything, we've spoken basically a lot about the key elements of what it is that you do, and the beginnings, the middle and the end as a kind of sandwich to the process that you've created. Is there anything you'd actually want to say to anybody that's at that end point that you've spoken about in the kind of coming out of the other side of either the prison or in the prison that doesn't get the support that you might offer? Is there anything you would say to them?
I suppose like just not to give up, because I think the thing when we talk about masculinity, we talk about it as in some instances as if it's something to be achieved.
Okay.
But masculinity is something that men have, right? And it's something that constantly evolves. And I think the thing that kind of strikes me with that is if I think back to myself at 18, 19, that version of me doesn't exist anymore. So if they're thinking about themselves now and the situation they're in now, that version of them pretty soon won't exist.
Cool.
They can't change the past, they can't change the things that they've done, but they can absolutely map out and dictate what the future looks like. And I think if we look at, go back to that word evolve again, if we look at ourselves and say, this is us only up to this point, right? We can't change the things that have happened in the past, but we do have the control and then hopefully the mechanisms and the skills to start contemplating how our actions affect others. We can then build to be better. And that doesn't apply just to men, that applies to anybody who's going to make a commitment to grow as a human being. If you can make a commitment that you'll never, whatever your worst thing is in anybody's life, if you can commit that what you're going to do next is always going to be better than the worst thing that you've done before, then you're continually going to get better for the rest of your life. And your version of masculinity will change. I went from being a young person who was involved in chaos to a student, to someone who was employed, to a dad, to a husband. All of them represent very different versions of masculinity.
Absolutely.
And I feel now that I'm softer, I'm more in touch with my emotions, I'm more likely to be vulnerable, and yet I feel more of a man than I ever have. Do you know what I mean? And I think like if you can recognise that it's only the start of a journey, then you'll be all right.
It's honestly amazing to hear, and I would also really like to give commemorations to how far you have come and the position that you've now pulled yourself into, because you are a role model in that sense to all the people that you choose to work with. It really is an actual role model that lived and breathed what you've talked about in the hardships and has then got into an incredible place and is now giving back to the people that might be in your previous situation. And the analogy that you used there also is really good for people viewing it as steps forward is always going to be in front of the steps that you've already previously made, and you can always better. And it's a really good way of putting it. If we take a moment to kind of go back in time to when you were in those times and you weren't doing so well, is there anything you saw or thought about masculinity when you were younger that you would change, and what would that be?
I suppose probably what I would have liked was for my eyes to have been opened earlier. I suppose that's why I do this work, is there are so many things that I didn't realise until I was in my 30s. I had I knew what misogyny was as a concept. I knew what patriarchy meant as an idea.
Okay.
I never ever recognised that every woman you know, your mum, your sister, your grans, your aunties, your teachers and all that were affected by that every day.
Okay.
And I think you can't underestimate how early education on that stuff
Absolutely.
it would have a massive impact. I grew up in a group of young men who were hyper masculine, who were involved in serious violence, who often were misogynistic and would share images and videos and various things that young guys do. And I think that's the problem. Young guys do it, but most of that isn't out of badness. It isn't out of contempt for women. It's out of total ignorance.
Okay.
But women deserve better than total ignorance.
Yeah.
And I don't think that is acceptable. I think it explains some of it, but it doesn't justify it. And I think the more education that we can have about equality generally, and that goes for race or gender or sexuality or all of these things, we're going the wrong direction right now, actually. And it feels like quite a weird time, actually, to be someone advocating against what feels like the tide currently. But I think probably now it's more important than ever that they've got people who have been on the wrong side of that, able to stand up and say, like, you can change. It's not too late. Do you know
Absolutely.
what I mean? And like, I worried that I'd have friends that would disown me. There are some friends, nobody disown me. There are friends that aren't my friends now, and that's all right, because sometimes you move and you evolve for a reason.
I was literally going to say the same word again, evolve, 100%.
But the people that you care about and the people that care about you will be there. Do you know what I mean? Like, the people that were in my life and cared about me at 18 had a real task to care about me at that time. Do you know what I mean? And I think, like, if we can educate people really on what the impacts of that are. I remember on the back of the Sarah Everard murder and the sort of Me Too movement, it was the first time that I really realised that the impacts of men's behaviour was impacting everyone. Do you know what I mean? And I'd heard people say things, and I'd seen it. Like, I'd seen friends, I'd seen family members be sexist and misogynist, but I had no idea really the impact. And I think if we can get some way of driving that home, that actually this isn't a woman over there or whatever, this is every single female that you come into contact with in any aspect of your life ever, then maybe we can start to wrestle with the magnitude of how big this is. And the thing is, patriarchy is a system. Systems are made, which means they can be remade and unmade. Do you know what I mean? And we've created the conditions that have got us here, but we can recreate them. Do you know what I mean? And we can change the conditions, and we can I've got a daughter now that's 2 years old, and a big part of the work I do right now is because I'm like, if I won't be complicit in her growing up in the system as it is. Do you know what I mean? So
that's very powerful. I think you touched on it a little bit there to do with kind of talking about families and whatnot, but what do you think is the source of these young people ending up where they are?
What young people? And
when you've talked a lot obviously about young people ending themselves up in trouble or in trouble with the law, or may even be things like prison, and obviously along the way they've developed those views that we've talked about so far. What do you think is the source of them getting to that stage?
I think, like, fundamentally there's a lack of resources, there's a lack of love in our society and in our systems and in our schools and in all the places that we assume quite often that everyone gets love at home. Do you know what I mean? And that's not the case. And when you look at our prisons, the vast majority of the young people, and not even just young people in prisons, are from some of the most deprived backgrounds. When we talk about deprivation, we usually assume that we're talking about monetary deprivation. If you are so busy focusing on feeding your kids or putting clothes on their back or having money for them to get to a class, that can be driven entirely by love, but it doesn't feel like love. And I think we have dehumanised so many of our things that actually young people don't feel connected to anything. And when a lot of the young people I work with, there's a really sad thing that happens in prison is I see some of the young men that I work with being some of the most vulnerable, most open, most compassionate that I've ever seen young men be, and it takes them to go into a prison to feel safe to do that.
Wow.
And I think that isn't just a failing of them. Most of our criminal justice issues are social justice issues. Do you know what I mean? They're manifestations of things that are going wrong in a society. If you accept that, not everybody will accept that, but if you do accept that, then to combat that, we also all need to take an element of responsibility on.
Sure.
There's a guy called Edmund Locard, and he was they call him the French Sherlock Holmes, and he basically was the guy that came up with he basically said every contact leaves a trace. So he was the one that came up with like looking for DNA and looking for hair and sort of CSI thing. And it makes perfect sense when you're saying a crime scene that every contact there's going to be some sort of evidence left. But if you apply that to us navigating day-to-day life, then every contact we have with a person, young or otherwise, leaves a trace. So if we consciously think about how we do that and how we navigate and how we deal with people in relationships, then we can see that as every interaction is an intervention, and every intervention leaves someone better if you're conscious about trying to do that. Our society would transform if we said that every touch point that a young person comes into, we show them love. Now, I'm not saying you hug them and kiss them, but show that you care, show up for them. Do you know what I mean? Do something, hold the door open. And if we all had a little bit more of that kindness, then we would have a lot less of the anger that goes around.
I agree with that. I think you've spoken that really well. And with the steps that you've said there, you think that young people with an obscure version of masculinity can change?
I think anyone can change at any point, unless there's like a clinical diagnosis that means that you operate in a certain way. Like the brain's amazing. The brain's very malleable. It can change pretty easily. Do you know, you can. I heard something once that said about road rage, and I used to get really bad road rage when I was younger, that if you just tell yourself like 5 or 6 times when it happens that you're not angry, you'll just stop getting angry. And I was like, very, very good. Never don't get angry.
Really?
Do you know what I mean? And it's like our brains, you can literally rewire a brain.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? You just need to try, or you need to have the support around you to allow you. Before that, you need to feel safe.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Agreed.
And otherwise, if you're sitting in your fight or flight response the whole time, then you're unlikely to be able to change your ways.
Agreed.
But if you're sitting with someone who can create the conditions that allow you to feel safe, and you can have conversations about how you do better, then I believe anyone can change.
Amazing. There's a lot of information there. I think you've touched on the ins and outs of the work that you do, the troubles that you experience. You've spoken really positively on the solutions that you might put in place, and even recommendations for young people out there if they are in a similar position as you've described, and what might be best for them to think, do, and maybe even act. And then we've proven in our conversation and the examples that you've given of yourself as well that change is possible, and it's very much something that can be done together through cooperation as well. Now, I could sit here and listen to your story all day long because it's very, very interesting. And like I said, I give commitments to the progress that you've made and the impact you make on young people. But it is time to say thank you very much for watching Fae The Source. If today's chat got you thinking, or you're looking for advice and support, head to young.scot/I feel for more resources. That's young.scot/AYE feel, because we're Scottish. You can also follow the link down in the description to go and find out more. And if you want to keep the conversation going, you can hit subscribe and join us next time. Until then, take care of yourself and those around you. And from me and Iain, it is goodbye. Thank you very much for watching.